what is a human? Like, what are we? I mean, I know we're matter, but also there's a spiritual side, and with consumption, people are, I don't know, what are we?
So interesting. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's so interesting because I don't know that I have ever, I think I have thought about that question, but I don't think I've ever thought of it in such a pointed way. So I appreciate you just like going straight to the heart of it and clarifying it. Interesting. Yeah, so my mind is sort of first going to like how an anthropologist would traditionally think of a human. And yes, a biological body that is then the term that anthropologists use is enculturated, that learns a culture, right? That has a culture sort of put into their mind, but not only in their mind, their actual body, right? The way that we move. Like one example that I always like is riding on elevators with Americans versus riding on elevators with Japanese people. Americans need a lot more space in between their bodies on an elevator than Japanese people do, right? You can imagine sort of the trains in Tokyo where they're like stuffing people in, and you're like, I mean, your space is like this. And so all of that to say that like, yeah, the ways that we exist in the world are very much culturally informed, right? In very, very subtle ways, is my understanding. Um, and so then that influences the ways that we give meaning to the world, right? The ways that what we think is possible and not possible, futures that we can imagine or not imagine, what we think is right and wrong, so on and so forth. And so in the past, I think I would have limited the human to that, and maybe not had much thought to spirit per se, which is also interesting though, because my initial attraction to my PhD program was trying to think about like religious institutions or spiritual institutions and the environment. And
Mm.
so I found a program here in Hawaii that a gentleman that I worked with, Leslie Sponsel, who calls it spiritual ecology. So he's looking at the connections between ecological relationships and spirit. And so I guess it always has been there, but not in the ways that I'm thinking about it now. I guess all of that is to say that I did have an interest in the spirit and kind of that aspect of human life, but it was from the perspective of like an observer, a scientist, an anthropologist, right? Why do people build temples? Why do they pray? What influences that have for their relationships with the environment, so on and so forth. As I have sort of gotten more involved in my own spiritual practice, my own spiritual growth through 12 step recovery, um, that way of relating to all of that has become much more an inner job, right? I have experienced personally spiritual insights, right? Awareness of some sort of set of powers that are larger than me, what some people might call God or something else, right? I don't really specifically have a word for it, but sort of tapping into those those qualities of life that we can really only tap into through our own experience. And so now I'm interested both as a scientist and an anthropologist of like how do we share those experiences and how do we learn from each other about those because they are so personal in one sense. Um, but also how do we use those sorts of experiences to step into the lives that we want to live, because for me that's been critical, is to be connected with something larger than myself, something that in my sense feels larger than the body, right, that is going to persist. So you might call it consciousness or Buddha nature or Christ consciousness or whatever folks call it, whatever that sort of essence is. But now I'm very much attuned to that being a reality of human life. Like I'm very much okay with that and interested in that. Um, and so then, and let me come back to the question of What is a human? I know it feels like I take these very like crazy routes, but um, what it means to be a human, I'm thinking of a recent podcast that I listened to with a Tibetan Buddhist scholar named Andrew Holacek, and he thinks a lot about death and what persists when the body dies and like reincarnation and things like that. And so he talks a lot about it, and there are spiritual traditions that talk a lot about yeah, whatever that energy is that persists as the body goes away, as the mind goes away. So what is that consciousness? And so I find myself increasingly fascinated by that, in that it does seem to out I mean, it seems bigger than, and that it outlasts the human as we think of an individual human that's in a body, right? So my sense is that there is something larger there, and like consciousness studies are very much on my radar these days as well. Just people thinking about consciousness. What is it? Yeah, does it survive outside the body? What does that mean for where we all are in this life, and so on and so forth? So, um, for me now, the human, I guess, is a I don't know that I'm going to be able to find the right words, but a kind of iteration, a particular experience that we are in, but it's not the end all be all of what we really are.